Hi, it's David at Art of David Smith. Welcome to the first video of the year. It's now 2020. Sorry I've been a little bit delayed in posting the first video, but after the Christmas break I was extremely poorly, so I've not been really in a great frame of mind to be drawing anything. So first video back, a little bit more complicated than we've been doing, and obviously I've had to do quite a bit of prep beforehand, otherwise the video would have been ridiculously long. So following the success of how to draw Baby Yoda, we've now come on to drawing the Mandalorian. So just to quickly run through what I've got here, obviously is an outline of the Mandalorian, the figure from the TV program. But what we're going to concentrate on today is obviously shading this. It would be too complicated a video, not having gone through any figure drawing beforehand, to suddenly expect you to knock this out. So we're just going to concentrate on some shading techniques and things like that, just to break us back into the new year really and get the ball rolling. So while I'm on the subject of the success of Baby Yoda vid, massive thank you to everybody who's taken the time to watch it. It really has exploded, so has the people subscribing to the channel, as well as the interaction with the comments. So thank you, really thanks for jumping in, saying hello, introducing yourself, putting the comments on there, and viewing the video. As I say, it's been fabulous, so hopefully we can carry on as we've left off in 2019. So obviously the Mandalorian, when I've been drawing this, what you have to bear in mind is still perspective. Now his helmet is slightly turned, but the shoulders are turned away from the helmet. So when you're drawing something like this and fleshing it out initially, just bear in mind that obviously the shoulders, chest plate, they're all still going in perspective like we've drawn in other pictures. So it's something you just need to bear in mind. When I was also drawing it, I'm using, because I've not used a grid method, I tend to use datum points, so from the top of the shoulder where it coincides with the gun and things like that, the length of the arm, the bottom of the elbow in regards to the rest of the diaphragm, length of arms, and use your pencil as a guide. So say the chest area is just over a helmet's length and things like that, and use that to drop your guidelines in initially, and then obviously you can clean up afterward and get it to this stage. But it doesn't have to be the Mandalorian, it can be anything. It's literally just going to be an exercise in shading this and putting detail in. As I say, it'll end up being a massively long video otherwise. So one of the things I'm wanting to do this new year is explore some of the other software, so I can play with the timings. I can speed up the parts of the video which are the time consuming parts, and you can see what goes on in obviously a sped up time, rather than having to endure like this. This was 45 minutes of drawing, so you wouldn't want to see that then and then have to start shading after the fact. So now as I've done with other videos and mentioned, how I personally work is I tend to go in and put in the darker areas first. Not full darkness, but it gives my drawings something a little bit more solid to work from. So what I'm kind of doing at the moment is roughing in some of the darker areas. Now during the course of the video, if you hear some large winds, we're just about to be hit by a series of storms in the UK. Can't remember what the name of this particular storm is, but they're anticipating winds in excess of 80 miles an hour, so you're going to hear the occasional blow down the chimney, I'm afraid, so just bear that in mind. So I'm just putting in some of the darker patches at the moment. Just really quite quickly. A lot of these areas are nearly black, so I can be a little bit quicker, not so precious with them. But as you can see from the drawing, when I started to lay this out, ideally this drawing should have been started over here, but even professional artists, when they start a drawing, won't always get it bow on the page how you want it. So when I clean this up off a camera, what I'll do is I'll shift it over, just correct that gun slightly, because I've drawn it so I can just fit it into the page, but it's a little bit tight. But as it's an exercise in shading, I'm not so bothered about that. Obviously, if it was going out professionally, I'd have to have restarted or taken a line drawing off of this using a light box, or you can use the window. Take a line drawing off and obviously centralise the character into the page. So, like with a lot of still lifes, when I was practicing still life before, when I was at school, we would often use dark bottles and things like that, because you get a really good contrast with the dark and the light. So using something like that to practice with, setting up a still life composition with a few bottles, possibly some fruit in there. You've all seen it in various paintings from the Grand Masters and things like that, and there was a reason they did a lot of those kind of studies, because it teaches you how to draw light and dark. So with this Mandalorian, unfortunately I'm still to watch the series. I don't seem to be able to access it over in the UK on my system at the moment, so I'm looking forward to that in the future. But looks like the stills what I've been looking at is kind of pinned down in some sort of firefight at the moment. So he's tucked behind a wall. So a lot of these reflections are because he's got such a excuse me about that, that's the telephone, just bear with me a moment. Right, I'm back. Sorry about that. The joys of working from home sometimes, the other telephone goes. Right, so as I was saying, he's kind of pinned behind here, but what you're picking up is a lot of the reflections, because the helmet he wears is obviously very reflective. So this, obviously these reflections and things are picking up on what's going on with the buildings, but what it gives us is an opportunity here, like when we're shading, like we did on the eyes and the facial features, and we mentioned on, obviously around this point, this is where you're going to have the darkest shade onto the helmet. As you get to the edge, the outer limit of that helmet, then even though it's dark, you're starting to pick up the reflections of the light which would be bouncing off of the wall at this point. So although it's a lot darker than the light which is on top, you still want it lighter than this area just to the side, and that will give it that real 3D effect. So this area here is where we're going to pick up a lot of the darker shading from the wall he's tucked behind seeking cover. So again, with the shaders, and back in, softening those edges, working our way around. So hopefully a lot of you will have got new art equipment over the Christmas period. One of the videos, what I want to do is I want to go through really all the art equipment that I use from day to day, go through that with you, and then we can look in future videos as to how we use all that equipment. So a lot of my work involves pencils, but I do oil painting as well. So although a lot of the commissions I do I've done recently, the majority have been colour pencils, I have watercolour pencils, normal pencils and pastel pencils, and sometimes the pictures what I do will be a combination of all those pencils to get the desired effect what I'm after. So we'll get into this eye slit area. The darks are very dark and really well defined, so when you get something that's really reflective, these areas will be very sharp, very crisp, so just bear that in mind. And again, when you're doing something where you are relying so heavily on light and shade, use some scrap paper to rest on. At the very least, one of the mitts, what you can get, one of the gloves, because what you don't want to be doing is running over with the back of your hand over this, because these crisp whites, what you want to retain, you're just going to muddy up with the back of your hand rolling over it constantly. So by at least keeping scrap paper or a glove, you retain those whites, because the whites, when you're doing something as reflective as this helmet, are as critical as the darks. They will give the overall piece solidity, substance, so really I can't emphasize that enough. And also, because I've got it fastened to my board as well, it saves that issue of crumpling the sides of the paper, which sometimes when you're working on the desk in front of you can be an issue, where you crumple the sides because it's inadvertently slipped over the side as you're resting onto it, and you fold the sides over. Another reason why I will always use a drawing board of some sort, even if it's a case of you don't have a drawing board like this, a piece of board laid out on, so if you elevate your board on several books and your board's propped on there, when you're viewing, you view it face on. If you drop this board like this and then you view it, what you can do is inadvertently, using like an optical illusion, you stretch the overall piece. So when you then look at it face on, you've stretched the piece out. So it's always worth, if you can do it, obviously have a drawing board. If you don't have a drawing board, get 4 or 5 books, thick books, to elevate a board of some sort, or your sketch pad, so that you are viewing and drawing at the right angle. Again, another tip there, but a very important one. And what you can do is, often with the boards, if you go to like a local DIY store and things like that, they will often have scrap boards just to the side, which they are happy to get rid of for a couple of pounds. I use these to stretch my paper when I'm using watercolour pencils, so you don't get the crinkling effect which you get when you use watercolours. But I also use them or can use them as an impromptu drawing board. So if you're out and you're drawing, say out in the landscapes or whatever, doing some landscape drawing, you can take one of these boards, a couple of bull clips, and still be able to draw at the correct angle. It's a lot more comfortable that way as well. Something for you. It stops the buckling as well, and some of the drawing sketch pads, things like that. The cardboard isn't always as thick as it could be on the back, so you tend to get a little bit of bowing. So if you take a board with you, you'll cut that out as well. So as you can see, still throwing in this sketch, these dark areas. But you can see how we're picking up these reflections of the buildings, as I mentioned around here, and you're really building it up. And then when you're happy that you've got a lot of the sketched tones in there, then you can go back, smooth out some of these black areas, sharpen them up and darken them to the correct level of darkness. So that is what obviously I'll be doing off camera. I will go back in and improve some of the blacks. But you can see the reflections on the helmet. Now, around the neck area on the Mandalorian, it's more like a fabric what he's got on this part, so you're not going to have the same level of reflection. Now, because it's fabric, draw it, I suppose, shade it in like you would expect fabric to be. It's kind of in rows, and then in the darker areas you can come back over with a crosshatch to put the shade in that way. But by doing it this way, and then you can even go in with your shader and just dot it in, giving a different effect from what this helmet would be. So you've got really ultra shiny areas through to textured cloth, and all still using the same pencils. It's just a slightly different technique, and you build it up in that way. And then obviously you can go back over it and darken some of the areas. So underneath this helmet, even though it's this fabric, when I need to, I can come back into it and just really darken those areas, so you get that feeling of the helmet sitting above the textured clothing underneath. So again, a bit more of a, I suppose it's a like a wobbly lines, series of wobbly lines working down, and then you cross hatch in the same way, and it just gives this textured effect to it. And just play with the way you use, the angle you use in the pencil. Obviously if you come in quite steep and you've got a nice point on there, that's when you're going to get your nice crisp dark lines. On this textured area, this clothing, you can use the pencil at a lot shallower angle, and it gives a softer overall effect. So you can play with that, but obviously this area now looks very different from that helmet area. Into areas, say like this shoulder pad area, just put some of the details on because it looks like it's seen quite a bit of battle damage, this thing, in the past. So again, we're going to put these cracks into there, really look like it's been through several firefights, chips and things like that. And then as we get, it's not very shiny, it's more like a leather effect on this, so you're still going to have your darker tones towards the edges. It's a bit more of a shuffly technique that I tend to use when I'm doing something like leather. What we're trying to do is get that feel, but then when you go in with your blending tool, you want to smooth it out, but don't completely flatten it. At the end of the day, leather has got a slight texture, a dimpling effect, so that's the kind of effect what you're going to go for. So again, when you blend, shuffle it around so you're not going in lines, and then you can build up. Again, go in with the darker areas a little bit more still. Shuffle that around. And then when you want the lighter areas, you're just literally going to pull in, even borrow some of the darker lead from elsewhere, bring it in. You don't want the crispest white, but you do want it quite, because it's the top of the shoulder pad, you're going to pick up the maximum light as it drops down and draw attention to it, and then you can go back into these details and give them a bit of structure as well, so it looks like there's been an impact here. It's really severely chipped up this shoulder protection, with some scorch damage and things like that into there as well, but you can start picking out those little details, really start going to town on it. Again, where you've got your moulding details, you'll crisp up these lines, crisp up the ones behind, but then you want to soften in this midsection so it gives like that moulding detail type of effect. So you've got dark here, slightly lighter onto this, it's catching the light at this area here. So doing those effects, you start to really build up the structure and make it feel like a three-dimensional object. And in this case, it's a person but it could quite easily be a still life. You're still going to use the same kind of techniques. So if you were drawing glass, you're going to have these ultra shiny areas, real defined areas between dark and light. If you then go on to, say, fruit, say an orange or something like that, it's going to be a bit more textured. There's that dimpling effect what you have with an orange skin. So it's going to be a bit more, the light areas are going to be a bit more subdued than they would be on the side of a glass, say, or this helmet. So you can see some of the different effects what we've touched on in other videos, but I'm trying to draw your attention to them now, because with something like this it brings to bear all these things we've been learning in past videos, how to see the reflection of the light so it gives it that real 3D feel, and the difference between textures. So obviously the highly reflective of the helmet coming into the texture of this, and the difference with this type of leather effect as well. And one of the exercises what we'll probably do later in the year is we will try shading different textures. So we'll have a real shiny chrome type ball, or we can have something like a wooden ball in contrast, a stone ball, and we'll draw these things on there and we'll shade them all in different ways, and it will give you practice in obviously different shading techniques, and then depending on what it is that you draw, you can start bringing those type of things to bear as well, and that will improve your overall shading, giving you a lot more confidence. And because you're just doing it over a series of spheres or whatever, or cubes, you don't have to be precious about them, and if you stuff it up, you start again. It's how you learn, and it's the best way of learning. It's always better if you've made mistakes and then learnt from those mistakes, rather than just doing something straight away all the time. You'll have far greater success in the future. So I'm not going to keep going on. What I'm going to do is obviously shade this one out of off the camera, finish it off. But if you've got any more questions, you want to watch any additional shading or anything like that, please just contact me in the messages. I mean, this channel is about doing exercises for you as much as for myself, so if there are things you want me to cover, techniques you want me to touch on again, just leave a message and we'll pick them up in other videos. But that's the first one for the year. I'll see you next week on the next video, but in the meantime, please share, please subscribe and keep watching. Well, thank you very much, and catch you later. Bye bye.